All right. So I hope you can see. Can you see the screen from Halachapedia?
Yes.
So I guess like a Jewish Wikipedia that goes through halachic issues. So they have a whole entry here on unfair competition. If you want, you can see the URL. Everyone see the URL up here, halachapedia.com, and it's the entry called unfair competition. Uh, so we'll just go through that for today. Source: some say encroaching on someone's livelihood is a Torah prohibition, um, and he quotes in the footnote that the Gemara in Makos derives the prohibition from the verse, "He did not perform evil with his neighbor," whereas the Gemara in Sanhedrin derives the same idea from the verse, "He defiled his neighbor's wife." The Gemara Yevamos compares one who takes the livelihood of someone else away, someone else's, the livelihood of someone else's to a murderer. Shut HaRambam and Shut Maharal Siman 89, based on Dvarim 27, and Rashba says it is included in the prohibition of stealing. Okay, so some say that when you take away someone's parnasa, even if you can do so legally, you can still violate a moral imperative of the Torah, and some say that it is a rabbinic decree, and I don't see necessarily that these are two opposing issues. We know that the rabbi stepped in to prevent unfair competition, that much we do know. Even when competition is permitted, it may sometimes be preferable to not opening a competing business. See Dina de Malchusa Dina for when the country's laws diverge from Torah law. And as he writes in the footnote, that Mahar Shadam says that if the local law allows competition, we would not be able to prevent someone from opening a store. In other words, even where the laws of unfair competition might argue that a person should not compete, but if the law of the land says, go ahead, we want people to compete as much as possible, then sometimes Dina de Malchusa Dina prevents one Jew from being able to sue another Jew. Pitrei Choshen says this is especially true when it comes to a large city that can support many stores, a city square where people come from all over, or a city which is growing. In these cases, it wouldn't even be preferable to avoid opening a competing store. So there are many different circumstances. Okay, the general guidelines. It is permissible for a competing business to open near a pre-existing business and sell the same products, provided that the newcomer lives in or pays taxes in that city. Now that's not something that we've seen yet. All we've seen from the Imrei Yaakov is something that we'll see later on in the Siman that we're learning, which is that it is permitted to open up a competing store, and the reason is that the reason that's the most lenient category of competition, right? Of ani hamahapech bechurara, like we talked about, the comparison of the poor person prospecting the garbage heap, because you're not competing for a specific customer, you're competing for the public consumption, and as long as there is enough business to support both of you, then it's certainly okay. And now we're seeing a new guideline, and perhaps we'll see this when we go through the halacha, that the other person opening up the store should be a person who either lives in or pays taxes to that city. If the newcomer threatens to cut off the income of the original tradesman entirely, many rule that the incumbent has the right to prevent the competitor from opening his business. And of course, that's going to have limitations as well, because what if the second tradesman is offering a better product or better service? What about the consumer's rights to have more choices? So it's a very delicate balance, and that's why the general rule is the rabbis cannot stop a competitor from opening up, but there will be those rare instances where a determination is made that we cannot support all of these stores from opening, right? We've got enough Lafa restaurants, right? So, that's like the joke in Toronto is how many Lafa restaurants will open before we get a closure. And the COR's policy up until now has been let them all open up and let the market bear what it'll bear. But if you're dealing with a smaller population and they can only support one pizza shop, like in other words, let's say we weren't living in Toronto, let's say we were living in Hamilton or another smaller community, and the case would be made to the rabbinical body there that we can only support one kosher establishment. If we open up a second one, we're going to completely put it out of business the original guy. And then when we put out of business the original guy, the new guy may decide, because he's a fly-by-night kind of person, that he's going to close up, and then we'll be left with nothing, which is often what happens in small Jewish communities. All right, in any event, so you get the idea. If the new business will charge lower prices or sell higher quality, some say that we cannot stop him from opening. That should be intuitive. Number 4, one business may even advertise and offer incentives to attract customers, but one, as he says in the footnote, however, one may not speak lashon hara about his competitor's product, which is very, very difficult, as I'm sure you can imagine. Number 5, whenever the newcomer is permitted to enter the market, he is prohibited to compete in an unfair manner, such as by selling below cost. And Rav Moshe Feinstein, he says that if the original store is overcharging on basic necessities, then it's not a problem to open a new store and charge the proper price. Rav Moshe is discussing a funeral home that is overcharging. And that has been a perennial issue, that many times when a funeral home has a monopoly on the cost, they overcharge. And that's why I think it's good for there to be competition. The fact that we have 2 funeral homes, Benjamins and Steeles, in our community is actually, I think, a very healthy thing, because it helps to, at least on some level, it helps to ensure that the costs will remain affordable, at least in theory. Of course, you can have 2 competing organizations that collude with each other and collaborate in keeping the costs artificially high, but we do have a problem with affordability of burial here in Toronto. The prices are quite high, and I don't have a solution for that problem. But Rav Moshe does say that if someone were to come into the market and undercut the cost of burial to be more reflective of what it actually costs, so that it doesn't become a very, very high profit business, then that would be fine. Number 6, if there is a specific day that is reserved for people to come and shop in a certain place, nobody can prevent anyone else from opening. And basically what that means is that if there's a limited access to vendors, then that's even more of a compelling reason to allow competitors to come, because then there would be a huge influx of customers coming into that area on that limited amount of time. Number 7, as a customer, some say that one should not buy from an establishment that opened when it was forbidden to do so. Others argue that once the store is open, a consumer may purchase at either establishment. Number 8, store owners cannot agree to forego these laws and allow unfair competition. Right? In other words, even if there's an agreement among all vendors that just, dog eat dog and will allow everyone to open up, that still doesn't make it right, even if everyone accepts it. Okay, exceptions. Competition is not limited at all in the following areas. Teaching Torah, there's no such thing as unfair competition. The more schools that open and the more synagogues, ostensibly, I'm not sure about synagogues. Anyway, he writes, the Gemara states that even Rav Huna permits unrestricted competition in the area of Torah education, since competition fosters improved Torah knowledge, and the term is kinas sofrim tarbe chokhmah. The Chazon Ish says that this logic limits the application to when it will improve Torah knowledge, and it is in the community's best interests. Rabbi Jachter writes that this doesn't apply to other mitzvot. Therefore, he quotes Rabbi Ezra Basri that these laws of competition would apply to selling chametz before Pesach. For example, if there's a particular person who's in charge of selling the chametz, you're not allowed to unfairly compete with him. Similarly, Rav Moshe Feinstein would not allow a second Sfarim Judaica store to open in a place that could not support two. On the other hand, Pitchei Choshen quotes the Levushe Mordechai that this does apply to other mitzvot. Accordingly, he allowed a new mikveh to open, even though it would force the first mikveh to close. So again, some gray area. Internet businesses, unfair competition does not apply. This is quoting Rabbi Howard Jachter, who's a modern-day posek, and this is based on the Gemara that the restriction on outside competition does not apply to a market day when people from outside the town come to shop. Another rabbi applies this in a general sense to malls and large shopping areas which attract shoppers from out of town. So anything that attracts people that come from out of town that's not limited to the local customers, unfair competition does not apply. You can open up whatever business you want as long as the argument can be made that there is a virtually infinite number of customers available to support it, and no one can accuse you of unfair competition. Okay, business districts in which the original business owner would benefit from new business opening up. That is, more customers will arrive. Okay. Number 2, competition is not limited when non-Jews are not observing the law anyway. So when it's not an exclusively Jewish business, right? That's why the issue of hasagas gavul comes up with kosher establishments, because it's limited to Jewish clientele. But when non-Jews are opening up competing businesses, then the laws of unfair competition don't apply at all. And number 3, competition is only limited in retail markets, not wholesale markets. Okay, and the Beis Yosef explains that this is the nature of the wholesale market, to allow unfettered competition, and therefore restricting it would destroy the market. Okay, let us go on. Stealing clients or employees, which is what we've been talking about up until now. The ethical imperative completing the deal. Number 1, if someone paid for a movable item and didn't yet take it, neither the buyer nor the seller should renege on the sale. If they do, Chazal enacted a particular curse called Mishpat for engaging in such activities. This was the very first chapter of the Rav Shulchan Aruch that we studied, about when a person has already enacted a sale, they can receive a curse if they renege on the sale. Number 2, someone who verbally agreed to a sale but didn't yet pay, it is proper to keep your word, and we said that if you don't, you're called a mechusar amana. You're a person of bad faith. Number 3, if someone agreed upon a price with someone, the principle of ani hamahapech bechorara doesn't restrict him from selling it to another buyer. However, it is nonetheless an issue of not keeping your word. So this is the controversy that we've been coming to, and this is where Ron, I think, asked the question that how come these halachas are only applying from the orientation of the buyer and not the orientation of the seller? And the answer is that the seller has only agreed to the price, but he's within his halachic rights. If someone comes and offers him a better price to sell it to that person, right? There is a problem of not keeping your word, and that goes back to the first chapter. But the onus of guilt is really more on the person who has come in and undercut the first person, and it could be if the second person was totally unaware that there was a first person, then he's quite innocently not doing anything wrong, and then the onus becomes on the seller, and we say to him, you really ought to keep your word. Now, stealing someone else's deal. Number one, if someone is making an effort to acquire something, there is a principle that a second person should not come to supersede him, to beat him to that acquisition. This principle is called ani hamahapech b'chorara. Our rabbis explain that anyone who takes the item from the first person is called a wicked person, and there is a dispute if the Beis Din can extract the money from the second person. We concluded that he cannot, that there is no legal recourse. The principle of ani hamahapech b'chorara applies equally to sales and rentals, as well as applies to movable items and workers equally. Now, here's the leniency in a unique deal. Number one, if the second person can find a similar deal to buy or rent somewhere else, he should not take it away from the first person. Number two, if the second person is interested in buying a larger quantity or a piece of real estate that is bigger land than that of the first person, he may do so, since he isn't taking away the first person's deal. He's actually offering a better deal to the seller. And so that's another exception to the rule which we haven't yet seen. Number three, if he can't find the same deal somewhere else, some hold that he could try to supersede the first person to buy the item first, while some forbid this as well, even when the item is unique. And that's where we saw this gray area in our discussions. Number four, if a person finds a good piece of real estate and someone else was already engaged in buying it, there is a dispute whether it is right to try to acquire it first. And so this is like a unique piece of real estate. Again, it depends on how unique and how special of a deal it is. Okay, so the next paragraph. At what point is it forbidden to interfere? Before the parties agreed upon a price, it is permitted for someone else to interfere and try to acquire the deal. Some say that the second person doesn't interfere even before the first buyer and seller agreed upon a price. There is such an opinion, even if they haven't yet agreed on a price, but they've already entered into negotiations. Number two, if the buyer left because they couldn't agree on the price, then the second person can obviously come in. Number three, it is a pious practice for a second person never to interfere with an original buyer, even if it technically isn't ani hamahapech b'chorara, that we saw as well. Okay, next paragraph. Stealing someone else's free item, something from Hefker, right? If someone has made an effort to acquire an item from Hefker, a free item, some say it is wrong for someone else to beat him to it and steal it. Others permit this if there's only one of the kind, if the item is a one of a kind item, like we learned before. Number two, everyone agrees if the first person put an effort to acquire the free item and he anticipated getting it, the second one may not take it away from him. That's the case of the guy climbing up the tree to shake the olives off the tree, or the fisherman who throws out bait, and another guy sets up his net just a little bit upstream. Number three, Sephardim hold that the second person shouldn't even take a free item, while Ashkenazim hold that the second person could take the item from Hefker, and the principle of ani hamahapech b'chorara only applies to sales or rentals. We saw also in the Rav Shulchan Aruch that there is no limitation when it comes to Hefker items, but only applies to transactions. But again, we saw that the Rav Shulchan Aruch is machmir and says that a person should be stringent even when it comes to Hefker items. According to Sephardim, it is only relevant once the first person already put in effort to acquire the free item, and not just if he saw it. And even according to Ashkenazim, there is a principle of the second person not stealing the free opportunity or the Hefker item from the first person if he already put in an effort and was confident that he would acquire it. Okay, the English is not great in this halachapedia, but we get the basic idea. And finally, the last section, number 1. It is halachically permitted to hire a worker who currently works for another similar job if they have a special talent that you don't think you will find in another worker. Regarding the legality of poaching employees from competitors, see here and the article on Dina de Malchuta Dina. I'm not sure where the hyperlink is taking us to, but here. Oh, there's an article over here called Legally Poaching Employees from Another Company and Preventing It. All right. But that's the secular law. Number 2, it is forbidden to get someone hired by an employer. The English is terrible here. If by getting the job, someone who currently works there will get fired. Oh, okay. It is forbidden to get someone hired if by getting a new person hired, you will cause someone else to get fired, unless the employer either way was going to fire that worker. Doing so is an issue of stealing the first worker's job. Okay, and I assume that we will see this as we go further in the Rav Shulchan Aruch. This also has links. There's an article by Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz called Hasagas Gevul, Unfair Competition. You see where it's probably on. Yeah, it's on YU Torah. He gives a shir. This is from 2009. Okay. And let's see what else. Rabbi Jachter's article on Hasagas Gevul. Rabbi Yehoshua Pfeffer's article on Hasagas Gevul. Should really see where that is. I think I'm not sure if I went to yeshiva with Rabbi Yehoshua Pfeffer. I'm not sure if it's the same person. But this is from dinonline.org, where he's got a number of issues. And sources and explanations from Rabbi Ari Wasserman, who's also a young man who I grew up with. Let's see. No, it's the wrong link. Let's see if this opens it up. Right, the bottom line is that when it comes to the laws of Hasagas Gevul, of encroaching on someone else's livelihood, there are guidelines, but it's very difficult to apply the guidelines to any particular situation because there are so many different permutations and circumstances which may change the law from one end to the other dependent upon those circumstances. And that's why it really requires intervention on any given every situation is unique, I would say, in all of these areas of Hasagas Gevul. So it's not something that a person can pronounce against another person, saying that the other person is definitely doing something wrong. But for your own edification, it's important to ask yourself the question, am I encroaching on this person's turf? Am I doing something that would be ethically incorrect because it's going to be causing a deprivation to another person? There are many circumstances in life where, by my being an enterprising individual, I will invariably cause a loss to another person because that's the nature of a free enterprise system. We try to offer better products. We try to make more money. And if that ends up putting a person who offers an inferior product out of business, then so be it, because ultimately we have to have in mind the well-being of the consumer also. But there are limitations to that. If we're both selling the same product and I just want to put up a glitzier sign and try to just, I see this guy started up and he's making a killing and I want to try and get in on the deal, so then there are times when it becomes unethical because I'm not offering a better product. I'm not offering a better system of delivery, and therefore I have to think twice before I permit myself to do it. When it comes to kosher restaurants, which is where this issue is most prevalent, we're going to go further and further into the Rav Shulchan Aruch, but if a person can make the argument that I'm offering a different product, and the product that I'm offering is in some way, my food tastes better than the other guy's food, my shawarma and laffa tastes better than that other guy's that's down the road, which was the case here in town, so then in most situations the Beis Din will allow both stores to open, even if they recognize that the community will not be able to sustain both. And the reason is that many times the argument will be is that the one person, if you allow a monopoly, that monopoly will either offer an inferior product or will end up jacking up its prices to the point where the consumer ends up suffering. So, as you can see, there's a lot of gray area here, but I just wanted to show you this website so that you can see that there's a tremendous amount of discussion, even to the point where it's brought in a website called Halachapedia. All right, any further discussion for today?
Yeah, Rabbi, just reversing the roles a little bit, we're concerned about the shopkeepers opening too close to one another, and the issues that arise from that. But I once mentioned this before. Where a situation that I run into is where the consumer, let's say, like I have 5 or 6 stores here in Toronto that we do business with, and there's these consumers, these ladies that will go around from store to store and trying to push the price down, and on the particular, let's say, dress that they want to buy, and until they get their price. So they're saying to the store owner, what's the best price you can give to me? The other store offered at this price. I want it lower, and then she keeps going around until she gets, pushes each person down, and even though there's a suggested retail price.
Is she telling the truth?
I don't know.
I mean, I think that's going to make the final criterion. Remember, we learned before that you're only supposed to make a certain profit off another Jew when you sell consumable items. When it comes to luxury items, you're allowed to charge more. You're also allowed to charge more based upon your cost of doing business, your overhead, the rent that you pay to your for your retail spot, and so forth and so on. So, as long as a person is not lying when they go to a competing store and they say your competitor is offering you this, will you match that price? It's up to the merchant to decide whether or not he wants to match the price.
Even though the company, like for us, for example, we have a suggested retail price, so that really doesn't mean anything. Then we can't
Yeah,
hold.
suggested retail price doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, you go to the dollar store today, right? And you see an item that's suggested retail price is $29.95, and they're selling it for $3, right? I mean, that happens all the time because people put on suggested We actually had this issue. Someone won a piece of jewelry in an auction, and the label said suggested retail price was $1,800, I think it was, and then he donated it to the shul and wanted to get a tax receipt. Excuse me, for $1,800. And we told him we can't do that. No one looks at suggested retail price to see the true value of the item anymore. You would have to get it appraised to be able to determine its true value, because suggested retail price, no, as the saying goes, no one pays retail anymore today. So I don't know if that's the answer that you were looking for, Ron. I apologize, but But it seems that as long as the person is not lying, they're certainly within their halachic rights to do what they're doing. But you're asking a theoretical question, not that they would actually listen to us, because this lady who's going from store to store sounds pretty determined to get the best price she can, and she's not going to listen to a rabbi to tell her what to do. All right, have a good Shabbos, everybody, and we'll see you, Mirz Hashem. We'll continue in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, Mirz Hashem, on Monday. Take care now.